Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. You know that we are big fans of Aristotle around here. Always enjoy diving into his thought and seeing how we can apply it to the modern day, despite being written thousands of years ago. Books like Aristotle's Politics or Ethics, Rhetoric, all remain incredibly important, incredibly prescient, ones that are still able to be applied in pretty much every situation we look around today. I want to look today at Aristotle's Politics. We're going to be looking at book 5, section 11, I believe, chapter 11, which is his discussion on tyranny. Now, Aristotle in the Politics is running through all the different forms of government. Remember, Aristotle believes that there are three main types of government: there's rule of the one, there's rule of the few, and there's rule of the many. And inside of those three categories, there is both good and bad. So for the rule of one, the good, it is the monarch. And he says this is the best form of government. If we have a true good monarch, a true benevolent, wise monarch, this is the best option for all government. But then he says a bad monarch, a tyrant, is the worst of all options. So in rule of the one, we have the best possible outcome and the worst possible outcome, which makes sense. There's only one failure point. It's rule of the one. In rule of the many, we have aristocracy, which is the good version, and oligarchy, which is the bad version. And in each one of these versions, the only real difference is always whether or not the government is ruling on behalf of the people for the good of the greater state, or if it's ruling for their own interests. So in the rule of one, you have the king who's ruling in the interest of the entire country, and then you have the tyrant ruling in their own interests. In the rule of a few, you have the aristocracy, again, ruling for the betterment of the entire nation. And then you have the oligarchy, which is ruling only on behalf of its own interests, its own money, that kind of thing. And then we have the rule of the many. And the better one is the polity, and then the degenerate one is democracy. And so again, it's whether it's rule in favor of the good of the nation, or whether it's in favor of just whatever the people in charge want. So it's not that democracy or oligarchy or tyranny are somehow better than each other inherently. It's that each one has a version where they rule in favor of the actual general good, and it could be it could be the people, the wider rule of many ruling on behalf of the good, or it could be a single person ruling on behalf of the good, and vice versa. Now, he does again point to the strengths and weaknesses of each. It's not that democracy and tyranny are exactly the same thing. It's not that a polity and a monarchy are exactly the same thing. They each have strengths and weaknesses. But he is saying that generally it's better, no matter what your form of government, to prefer one that is going to rule for the betterment of the entire nation and not just the individual. Now, tyranny is often, obviously, the degenerated form of monarchy. It's rule of one for the interests of one. And Aristotle, being a thorough political scientist, or what amounts to political science or philosophy at this time, political theory, is going to say, okay, here's what a tyrant should do if they want to keep power. Now, you could view this one of two ways. You could say, oh, well, it's, satirical, or you're just pointing out the way in which, the tyrant would rule, so you can be aware of these things. He's warning us against these. Or you could say, okay, this is guy's just doing real politic, and he doesn't like tyranny, but if you're going to be a tyrant, this is the mechanical way you would keep power. It's kind of like Machiavelli, right? Like Machiavelli actually preferred a republic to a monarchy, but he still wrote The Prince, which is his most famous work, in which a lot of people assume that because he's giving practical advice to kings, a king is what he would like. But that's not actually the case. And Aristotle here is saying, okay, well, I obviously don't like tyranny. Actually, I think it's the worst form of government. But if you were a tyrant, this is what your playbook would look like. And because this allows us to, see the different mechanisms that he thought would be critical for a tyrant to keep power, I think it's useful because we can look at the world around us today, the people in charge, the way our societies function or they want to function, and see, what parts of this are we experiencing? What can we tease out of this? How does this impact us today? So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to read through most of this section and take a look at what Aristotle said. All right. So let's jump in here, where we're just going to jump right into where he starts talking about tyrannies. He says, as to tyrannies, they are preserved in two most opposite ways. One of them is the old traditional method in which most tyrants administer their government. Of such arts, Periander of Corinth is said to have been the great master, and many similar devices may be gathered from the Persians in the administration of their government. These are firstly the descriptions mentioned some distance back for the preservation of a tyranny. Insofar as this is possible, that the tyrant should lop off those that are too high. He must put to death men of spirit. He must not allow common meals, clubs, education, and the like. He must be upon his guard against anything which is likely to inspire either courage or confidence in his subjects. All right, so right here we're seeing a few things the tyrant needs to do right away. First, he needs to get rid of those that are too impressive, too inspiring. He needs to put to death men of spirit. Why? Because he doesn't want any competition. When you're a tyrant, you're ruling through pure charisma or pure fear, right? You are relying on your dynamic ability as a leader. So you don't want any other competition because you're a tyrant. You're not a monarch. You're ruling for your own interest, not the interest of your people. So your own interests say, I need to be in charge all the time. And I'm not going to take any risks with other guys. They might be good for the country. They might be great guys. They might even be great leaders, but they will not be in my tyranny because they might outshine me. So I need to put those people to death. I need to run them out. I need to cut them down, as Aristotle says. He says he must not allow common meals, clubs, education, and the like. So we don't want people getting together, forming bonds. Common meals in most city states, classic city states, were the way that you bonded the community together. They usually shared a common meal, often sacrificed to the god of the city. And that was considered both a religious and social ritual that bound everyone together in community, made them part of the same tribe, part of the same city, part of the same identity. So we don't want that. We don't want our people to feel unified as a people. We want them to feel separated and isolated. No unity, no common identity, no clubs or education. We don't want educated people. That one's pretty obvious. If I'm a tyrant, I don't want intelligent people. I don't need their input. I'm not going to listen to it anyway. I don't want any of them becoming smart or spirited. That's it. That's a threat to my identity. I don't want clubs. I don't want people getting together, organizing, making friends, just like the common meals. The bonds are the problem. By the way, that's why you hear guys like me and Dave Green and Matt Williams all saying, we need to get together in real life. You need to be forming community. You need to be joining clubs, join the Old Glory Club, join Exit, join whatever fraternal organization is in your area, work with like-minded people, go to church. The reason is that this is exactly the opposite of what Aristotle says the tyrant wants you to do. How do we oppose tyranny? By having shared connections, shared identity, shared understandings, being able to work together. And that's exactly what they do not want. That's exactly what a tyrant should oppose if he is going to stay in power. He must be upon his guard against anything which is likely to inspire either courage or confidence among his subjects. Again, he cannot allow courage or confidence. You don't want any of those people looking at your tyranny and saying, well, maybe we could take him. Maybe we could figure out how to get past the guards. Maybe we could figure out how to outfox him. Maybe we could figure out how to depose him. You do not want any of that. You don't want courage. You don't want confidence. You want people scared of you, dependent on you, worried about you. He also says he must prohibit literary assemblies or other meetings for discussion. So we want to make sure, just like the clubs and the common meals, we don't have people getting together. They're not enjoying culture, discussing things. The culture is the literary and cultural problems are twofold. One, it's going to remind you of who you are. All right. You're going to have a more total understanding of the world. You're going to have a more complete perspective about your history and your heritage and your traditions and your understanding. They can't just feed you what they want you to believe. You'll be too familiar. And also, you'll be getting together with like-minded people and again building that community. So just like banning the common meals and the clubs, you want to ban those literally assemblies, other meetings for discussion. And he must take every means to prevent people from knowing one another, for acquaintances beget mutual confidence. Again, isolated, individual. Don't be collectivist, be an individual. Be an atomized individual. Don't trust anyone else. Don't let anyone trust you. Don't be dependent on anyone else. Don't let anyone else be dependent on you. Don't organize together. Don't think of a common understanding. Don't think of yourselves as having a common identity. Every one of you is an individual. That's what a tyrant wants. He wants individuals who will not work together, not recognize each other, not work towards a common goal. Those are the threats to a tyrant. So he has to make sure it prevents any other way of people knowing each other, because that mutual confidence is gained by having those acquaintances, by building those relationships. Further, he must compel all persons staying in the city to appear in public and live at his gates. Then he will know what they are doing. If they are always kept under, they will learn to be humble. So they need to be observed all the time, right? If they were out near the city gates, he can observe them from the palace or from a tower. If they're out further away in their homes hidden, he doesn't know what's going on. So we have to have a constant surveillance. People who are under a constant surveillance, the tyrant will know what they're doing, and they will learn to be humbled by that constant being kept under. Now, of course, today, we don't need that. Many people will, of course, first think of like Bentham's panopticon and the ability to like see every single prisoner in a cell, making sure that every one of these is ultimately visible. But we don't even need that anymore, because you have a cell phone and an internet history and all the other ways in which the government can observe you constantly. You're expected to post on social media. You're expected to make certain declarations of allegiances to different causes and understandings. And so that constant pressure that you are being observed on social media, through your electronics, CCTV cameras around major cities, you can't do anything, you can't say anything, because it might end up getting posted online. So even though the government isn't necessarily theoretically watching you all the time, though maybe they are, given the current level of the current complexity of our technology. But even if they aren't watching you all the time, your friends and family and coworkers are. And what if they record something you say, and then that ends up on the internet? Could ruin your life forever. So even though we don't have the city gates here, we certainly have something that's very analogous. In fact, something that probably any tyrant desperately wishes they had, instead of having to force everyone to live near the city gates. In short, he should practice these and like Persian and barbaric arts, which all have the same object. A tyrant should also endeavor to know what each of his subjects says or does, and should employ spies, like the female detectives at Syracuse and the eavesdroppers whom Hiero was in the habit of sending to any place of resort or meeting. For fear of informers prevents people from speaking their minds, and if they do, they are more easily found out. So you should observe people all the time, but if for some reason you can't, you need to employ a bunch of spies. You need to have this spy network constantly out there looking and hearing and trying to understand. And not only will this give you this constant information, not only will you have that intelligence on what everyone else is doing and be more likely to be able to control it, but in addition to that, the fear of just knowing that those agents could be anywhere will scare everyone into inaction, right? Think about how often you hear, we can't organize in real life as right-wing people because there'll be a federal agent in there. And you know what? A lot of times there was. The federal agents were really trying to make up all these garbage cases and pressure every right-winger. We've seen this especially in countries like the UK or Australia, but even in the United States, that was the case. And so it's not that the charge that a federal agent might be in your organization is not true. It was true, but also the fear that they might be there made that idea that you could organize, you were constantly scared of it. And of course, this already applies to everything I said about social media. All of your friends and family and coworkers, they are spies. You have to be worried because they have a camera. If they disagree with you politically, they can destroy your life in a minute. So even if they're not official spies of the state, even if they're not official informants, they are functionally informants on you. And so you have to constantly live in fear that this will happen. So this is very much something that is present in our everyday lives. Now, less with, I guess, the federal agents theoretically under the Trump administration, but still this constant fear that something you say or something you do will go viral on the internet and will destroy you means a lot of people have to be very, very quiet with their actual beliefs and certainly any kind of action they would take. Another art of the tyrant is to sow quarrels among the citizens. Friends should be embroiled with friends, and the people with the nobles, and the rich with one another. Also, you should have impoverished his subjects. He thus provides against the maintenance of a guard by the citizens, and the people having to keep hard at work are prevented from conspiring. The pyramids of Egypt afford an example of this policy. Also, the offerings of the family of Cleopas, or I'm probably saying that wrong, and the buildings of the temples of Olympian Zeus uh, and by Pystrides. I'm sure I'm saying it very wrong. And the great Polycretian monument at Samos. Somewhere the ancient professors, the classics professors, are pulling out their hair and screaming. All these works are alike intended to occupy the people and keep them poor. So two things here, right? He says, first, you need to go ahead and have these people quarreling all the time. Set friends against friends and nobles against the people, the rich against one another. Get everyone angry at each other all the time. You know what's really good for this? Democracy. Democracy is really good for this. I'm not angry at the rulers. I'm angry at my neighbor. I'm not angry at the elites with actual power. I'm angry with the guy down my street who owns a Ford dealership because he's got more money than me. This is how you actually set people against each other, right? It's everyone else's fault. It's never the ruler's fault. So make sure that they're always arguing against each other. You could do this a lot of ways, but democracy is certainly one. Also, he suggests that you need these large public works projects that, like, the people are mandatorily required to involve themselves in, and that will keep them busy the whole time, right? So that you don't have to worry about it. They're too exhausted. They have to constantly work. They have to constantly keep their eye. And these public works are really only glorifying usually the ruling class. Who are the pyramids of Egypt for? Well, they're for the Egyptian rulers. It's their tomb. It's for their glory. So not only are you raising my power as a tyrant, but I'm also ensuring that you don't have time to think about anything else. You spend all day doing what else you need to do. Then you give your labor towards this monumental task. You're too busy at the end of the day to worry about anything, and my prestige continues to grow. So keep them angry, keep them arguing with each other, keep them poor, and make sure that they're constantly working. Any of that sound familiar? Let's see here. Another practice of the tyrant is to multiply taxes, lots of taxes, after the manner of Dionysius of Syracuse, who contrived that within 5 years his subjects should bring into the treasury their whole property. The tyrant is also fond of making war in order that his subjects may have something to do and be always in want of a leader. All right, so tyrant needs to raise a lot of taxes, make sure the people are heavily taxed so they don't have any money. Then he's bringing in lots of money in there. And then he should also constantly be making war because that will keep the people distracted and they'll always feel like they need to have a leader. Someone needs to have power. Someone needs to be having control. We're at war. We don't have time to debate whether or not the tyrant should be in charge. He's busy fighting off our enemies. Again, none of these things are particularly difficult to spot in our current reality. And whereas the power of a king is preserved by his friends, the characteristics of a tyrant is to distrust his friends because he knows that all men want to overthrow him and they above all have the power. So remember, for Aristotle, the king is not a bad thing. A monarch is not a bad thing. It could be the best thing. It actually could be the best form of government. So what's the difference between the king and the tyrant here? Well, he says the king is preserved by his friends. The king is ruling for the good of the people. And so his friends are his closest allies because they want him to succeed. his success is their success and the rest of the people's success. We're all working together. We have the same telos. We have the same end in mind. But the tyrant, he doesn't like his own friends because they're the most powerful people around him, of course. He's the tyrant. He has all the power. But because he has all the power, everyone wants to overthrow him. He's constantly in jeopardy. And who are the only people who really probably have the ability to overthrow him? His friends, who have a lot of power and wealth because they're attached to him. So at some level, he knows he probably needs them because no one truly rules alone, right? Iron law of oligarchy. It's always going to be some clique of people sharing that power. However, he also despises them because they're the only people close enough to power to actually take it. So he needs them. He keeps them around, but he doesn't rule with their friendship. In many ways, he has to rule against it. He has to be worried constantly that these people will come for his power because everyone hates him because he's not ruling in the interest of the greater civilization. Again, the evil practices of the last and the worst form of democracy are all found in tyrannies. So all the problems we see in the worst problems of democracy also exist when it comes to the rule of a tyrant. Such are the powers given to women in their families in the hope that they will inform against their husbands, and the license which is allowed to slaves in order that they may betray their masters. For slaves and women do not conspire against tyrants, and they are, of course, friendly to tyrannies and also to democracies, since under them they have a good time. For the people, too, would feign in monarchy, therefore by them, as well as by the tyrant, the flatterer is held in honor. In democracies, he is the demagogue, and the tyrant also has those who associate with him in a humble spirit, which is the work of flattery. So he says here that you see a lot of tyrants and democracies both lean on women and slaves. Now, to some extent, he's pointing out here, okay, I think one part of that is because women and slaves generally are not treated well by other forms of government. So maybe it just makes sense logically that they're going to side with those types of governments. But he might also, and I think probably is, given Aristotle's other passages about these two groups, he's also pointing to what he believes to be a predilection by both groups to be welcoming to tyranny. They tend to be groups in his mind that are not looking for their own individual wills or dignity to be asserted. They just want the government to treat them better. And so if a tyrant is going to offer them these abilities to go ahead and have more rights or have more things, as long as they turn on their husbands or their masters, well, they're going to do it because they see that as an advantage. Now, maybe you'll say, "Oh, good. Well, they should, because nobody should be a slave, and women, shouldn't have any. They should be able to do whatever their husbands do. They shouldn't have any more loyalty to their husbands than anyone else." Maybe that's ultimately where you believe, but that just kind of speaks to his point. Whether you think that women and slaves would be justified in those actions or not, he's saying, well, because of that, they're not going to resist tyrants. They're going to work with tyrants. They're going to encourage tyrants. And so he also points out that flattery is a huge problem, that people like this enjoy, surrounding themselves with flatterers. Now, if you're in a democracy and it's the people, it's the demos that's in charge, it's popular sovereignty, well, then you flatter the crowd. That's what a demagogue does. He gets up and says, we're the Americans and we're the best, and it's all about you guys, and we're going to give you everything you want because the people are right and the people speak for us. That's demagoguery. That's flattery of the people. Or if it's the tyrant, you might have just a bunch of sycophantic people saying, "Of course the emperor has clothes on. Oh, he's great. Everything he does is amazing. He's the most handsome, smart guy around here, and he just does whatever is right, and we should all trust him." That's flattery, right? And so he says, whether it's the tyrant or the democracy, flattery in these late stage failing governments, they tend to be key, right? And so that's something to watch out as well. And of course, we can point to many people. We can even point to Donald Trump. If there's one thing we know about Donald Trump, I don't think he's a tyrant, but if there's one aspect he certainly has, it's that he seems to enjoy flattery quite a bit. Flattery will get you everywhere with Donald Trump. So that is a predilection that he has that I think manifests itself pretty obviously, and is one of the things Aristotle warns us about. His tyranny, hence tyrants are always fond of bad men because they love to be flattered. But no man who has the spirit of a free man in him will lower himself to flattery. Good men love others, or at any rate, do not flatter them. All right, so this is important because a lot of people, when they look at monarchy, and remember, monarchy and tyranny are different things for Aristotle. They are different things for Aristotle. A lot of people will look at the depictions of kings in popular media, and they will say, oh well, it's all people, they run around terrified of these people and they basically worship them and everyone's flattering them all the time. And look, some of that most certainly went on. Okay, it's not to pretend that no one was a flatterer and no one was shameless or obsequious before a king. That obviously happened. But Aristotle says there's a difference between a king and a tyrant. And one of the things he's kind of pointing to, and you notice he referenced the Persians many times over, but there's a very different understanding of what a king does between, say, the English and the Chinese, right? Like the God Emperor model is very different than the constitutionally restrained king, right? These are very different models. And so you can have a king who is not worshipped like a god. In fact, in many cases, kings came out of this idea that they were just the first among many nobles. And so there was a certain level of, the king wasn't equal with a peasant, but there's an understanding that the king was not God either. There might have been, the divine right of a king later on developed. That's not actually like a big thing in the 1300s, even though obviously they were receiving crowns from the Pope or something like that, oftentimes. But the idea that the king himself was like somehow deified simply did not exist for most of Western history, in large part because that wasn't allowed under the Christian church. That's a huge problem with, when the Romans went from having a republic, they had to start deifying their emperors, right? Like, because you needed the imperial cult. And one of the reasons that Christians and Jews, funny enough, were considered bad subjects is they would not worship, right? Even though like it was mainly performative, like most people didn't really believe that Caesar was like a god, or at least not early on. But like you went through the motions and you just said, yeah, our Lord, and this deified quasi religious king emperor, we're going to worship him, but the Christians wouldn't and the Jews wouldn't. And so that was a huge problem because you can't really have the tyranny if people aren't treating you like you're a deity, like you're someone who has that level of power. So remove it. So as he's saying here, you could be a man who lives under a king honorably if you're not someone who's going to lie and flatter, and like debase yourself. There are scenarios where you can have a monarchy where you are still a man under respect. But if everyone needs to flatter, if everyone needs to fall down and worship, well, then you probably have a tyranny, not just a monarchy. Moreover, the bad are useful for bad purposes. Nails knocks out nails, as the proverb says. Nail knocks out nail, as the proverb says. It is characteristic of a tyrant to dislike everyone who has dignity or independence. He wants to be alone in his glory. But anyone who claims a like dignity or asserts an independence encroaches upon his prerogative and is hated by him as an enemy to his power. Another mark of a tyrant is that he likes foreigners better than citizens and lives with them and invites them to his table. For the one are enemies, but the others are invited into no rivalry, or the others enter into no rivalry with him. So a couple important things here, right? First, he doesn't like people who have dignity. He doesn't like people who have honor. He doesn't like people who have independence. For many of the reasons we've already kind of mentioned, he's kind of repeating himself here a little bit. But people with independence, people with dignity, people with honor who are not going to put up with certain actions. And you need that to, like, by being tied to others. Like, you have to be an individual in the sense that you care enough about like how you are treated and what you are going to do. You need to have an individual will, but you also need to build bonds with others like you so you can push back against the stronger tyrant. So if you're a tyrant, you don't want people with dignity. Don't want people who see themselves as having their independence encroached and thinking that they have their own prerogative. You're the only one with prerogative. You're the only one with glory. You're the only one with standing, and you need to keep it for yourself, right? That's number one. The next one is that uh, he doesn't like his own people. He prefers foreigners. Well, why does he surround himself with foreigners? Well, because they're his own people. They have a stake. They have interests. They have real claims. They have support networks. All the stuff we talked about with Bertrand de Juvenal and Democracy in America. I'm trying to think of the French author. De Tocqueville. There's so many Frenchmen I have to reference. De Tocqueville talking about these voluntary associations, or Burke and his little platoons, right? Your people who live in your country, they have these bonds. They have all those common meals and social clubs and literary societies and shared religion and all the things that he was worried about as a tyrant previously. So you don't want all of those people who have that support network, have that material wealth, have those connections, have that organization, share an identity, share a faith, share a tradition, share a belief system. You don't want those people around you. You want the foreigners around you because they're not a rival. Like, they're cut off from their homelands. They're independent. Right now, I think when he's talking about this, he meant, individuals. I don't think he meant like they wanted the entire, I don't think he was thinking move all of Somalia to Minnesota. Though, eventually I guess that does happen. That's like a slow deterioration there. I think he was thinking more of bringing individuals from different countries, foreigners around them, so they would flatter you because, well, they don't have any ties to anything, right? They don't have their country here. They don't have their people here. There's no one else for them to be loyal to. There's nothing else for them to be loyal to. In many cases, the foreigners are only here because the tyrant has let them in, right? And so they are entirely dependent on the tyrant. And so the tyrant prefers the foreigner to their own people because it's easier to rule them. It's easier to control them. They owe you everything. They have no common bonds. They have nothing else to fall back on. They have no principles. They have no prior understanding or history. They don't have a social support network that allows them to draw strength from other places. They just have you. But all those people in your own country, well, they're native here. This is their homeland. They have the families. They have the churches. They have the communities. They have the clubs. They have that infrastructure. So for the same reason that the tyrant worries about his friends, who are the ones that have money and could possibly overthrow him, he also worries about his own people because they're the ones that could actually push back. The foreigners are not going to unseat a tyrant. That's not how it works. Foreigners might eventually conquer the country or collapse the country, but they aren't going to overthrow a tyrant. That's not how things play out. All right. Such are the notes of the tyrant and the arts by which he preserves his power. There is no wickedness too great for him. All that we have said may be summed up by under three heads, which answer to the three aims of the tyrant. They are: one, the humiliation of his subjects. He knows what a mean-spirited man will not conspire against anyone. Two, the creation of mistrust among them. For a tyrant is not overthrown until men begin to have confidence in one another. And this is the reason why tyrants are at war with the good. They're under the idea that their power is endangered by them, not only because they would not be ruled despotically, but also because they are loyal to one another and to other men and do not inform against one another or against other men. All right. So here's the funny thing. So he tells you first humiliate your subjects, so they don't have any dignity. They're mean spirited. They're not going to be able to conspire together because they're just awful and demoralized and humiliated. Also, make sure you have mistrust because you don't want people trusting each other. And here's the really critical thing, right? We all think this is what normally you hear from, like, especially normie conservatives. Oh, well, you need to be based on ideas because it's that rejection of these awful ideas. That's what will allow you to push back against tyranny. How do you oppose tyranny? You become an ideological individual. That's why you do it, because that's going to make you oppose tyranny, right? But that's not what Aristotle says here. He says something very different. He says, uh, he says, yeah, sure, they might not want to be ruled by a despot, right? Like they don't be ruled despotically. That's a problem. They don't want it. They'll push back because of that. But what will really let them push back is not their desire to oppose the ideology. It's not their desire to be free or have liberalism or whatever. It's not about having the abstract values of the country or the Constitution. That stuff is important. That might bond you together, but that's not actually what opposes tyranny. What opposes tyranny? Collective will, loyalty. I have gotten a lot of pushback on this. I've gotten a lot of very angry people whenever I say this, but I'll say it because it's real. The most important political value is loyalty. The most important political value is loyalty. Because without political loyalty, you can't get anything done. When everything's ideological, there's 1,000 ways you can argue about ideology. This is why highly ideological forms like libertarianism or kind of this abstract conservatism are not productive because they spend all of their time arguing with each other. Well, you don't agree in the exact nap I do. You don't agree to the exact understanding of this thing that I do. You're not understanding this exact thing. The constant ideological argument allows you to then betray people. Oh, well, I'm not going to back that guy up. I don't agree with him on that one thing. Okay, but like he agrees with you on 90% of stuff. And if they do that to him, they're going to do it to you. Yeah, but I don't want to get in trouble. So I'm principled. I got principles. That's why I'm not standing up for Alex Jones or whoever, right? Because I don't agree with him on something. We're not ideologically aligned. That's why I can be a coward. That's why I can bail out. That's why I can leave that guy to twist. That's why I can ultimately support my enemies. And you see this all the time. Libertarians are doing this right now with borders. Oh, what about government power? What if they're wasting some money? Okay, buddy, but like the left is trying to kill you and make sure your elections are rigged. So like maybe we can put that to the side and figure out the hypothetically best application of state power after we stop the left from killing us. No, I want to do it now so that I don't have to risk anything. So that I don't have to actually work together with people. That's what Aristotle is saying here. You need loyalty one to another. That this guy's not going to form on me. This guy's not going to act against me. This guy has my back. Nobody wins a battle with 1,000 people standing behind them ready to stab them. You need to know that when you're fighting the enemy, you have people on your side. They're not going to defect. They're not going to run away. They're not going to compromise just because you might disagree on something. So yes, people will collectively get together and fight against despotism, but they must be able to trust each other. They must be loyal to one another. And that's why part of the American Declaration is swearing your sacred oath. You're swearing your sacred oath to other men. It's not just the ideology. Yes, we agree on the ideology. Yes, we follow these principles. And then we swear our sacred oaths to each other because the loyalty is what mattered. That's what actually gets the job done. Again, it's not that you don't have principles, but it's that loyalty comes first. And by having loyalty to each other, you will generally arrive at common principles, but not always the other way around. And that's, once again, causality, order of operations that I think often completely gets lost. And then 3, he says, the tyrant desires that his subjects shall be incapable of action, for no one attempts what is impossible, and they will not attempt to overthrow a tyranny if they are powerless. Under these 3 heads, the whole policy of a tyrant may be summed up, and to one of them, or other of all of them, all of his ideas may be referred. One, sow distrust among his subjects. Two, take away their power. Three, he humbles them. So here he says, look, you need to make it seem that overthrowing the tyrant is just impossible because no one's going to attempt the impossible. No one wants to charge a machine gun nest if nothing's going to happen. Okay. You might charge a machine gun nest if it's going to save 30 of your buddies and you're going to win this battle and you're going to get awarded this medal and there's going to be your name in a history book for decades. Then you might charge a machine gun nest. But no one is charging machine gun nest for a cause they think is impossible, for a cause they think is unwinnable. And that's what he's saying. So this is why it's important that we have a realistic view. Okay, there's a balance here. On one side, we need to have a realistic view of what can be done. What are the true, real political applications of what we see around us? Like, we need to understand that we can't lie to ourselves and say, oh, well, if I just follow this thing or do exactly what the Constitution says here, I'll be just fine and I don't have to think about it at all. Like, you don't want that. That's naive. But at the same time, you don't want the black pillars who are just like, well, nothing's ever going to happen and Trump's never going to do anything and there's just nothing we can ever do. And you just give up and sit on your computer and complain because there's just never any hope, right? Like, we need to have a middle ground. No, I don't trust Trump or any other Republican should just do something because they got elected. No, I don't think the majority of the government actually behaves the way it says in the Constitution when you win an election. I'm not going to be naive about those things. I'm going to think about power. I'm going to think about how to win power. I'm going to think about how to secure this and push forward. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit around and say nothing can ever be done. No victories can be had. We're always going to fail. You should never trust anyone. Don't get out there and organize. It's probably all federal agents. Don't get out there and build your skill set. It's all useless anyway. Don't bother trying to date a woman. Don't bother trying to get married. Don't bother trying to have kids. Don't try to seek a relationship with God. Don't do any of that stuff. Don't try to build wealth. It's all just going to get inflated away anyway. That stuff is just, that black pill, streak is just nothing but useless. That's going to keep you. That's what a tyrant would want you to believe so that you don't actually try to figure things out. He says this is then one of the two methods by which tyrannies are preserved, and there is another which proceeds upon an almost opposite principle of action. The nature of this latter method may be gathered from a comparison of the causes which destroy kingdoms. For as one mode of destroying kingly power is to make the office of king more tyrannical, so the salvation of a tyrant is to make it more like the rule of the king. But one thing, the tyrant must be careful. He must keep power enough to rule over his subjects, whether they like him or not. For if he once gives this up, he gives up his tyranny. But though power must be retained as the foundation in all else, the tyrant should act and appear as to act in the character of a king. In the first place, he should pretend to care about public revenues and not waste money in making presents of a sort at which the common pledge get excited when they see the hard-won earnings snatched from them and lavished on courtesans and strangers and artists. He should give an account of what he receives and of what he spends, a practice which has been adopted by some tyrants. For he will then seem to be a steward of the public rather than a tyrant. Nor need he fear that while he is the lord of the city, he will ever be in want of money. Such a policy is at all events much more advantageous for the tyrant when he goes from home than to leave behind him a horde, for then the garrison who remain in the city will be less likely to attack his power, and a tyrant, when he is absent from home, has more reasons to fear the guardians of his treasures and of the citizens, for the one accompany him, but the others remain behind. So he should start acting as if he's a king. All right, so you could do the classic hard power, all the things we just ran down with a tyrant, humiliate the people, keep them poor, keep them fighting, keep them separated, keep them busy. Or you can start acting more like a king, but you need to make sure to keep all that power. You can start looking more responsible. You can start looking like you care about the people. Keep a log of the money you're taking in and how you're spending it so you can show them, But that's going to be an advantage for you because when you're gone, abroad, you don't have to worry about people basically coming around and stealing your stuff, stealing your power. They're not going to be as inclined to stab you in the back. If you're a tyrant and you leave to like go fight a war somewhere or deal with something, then everyone who hates you is going to try to rush in and take all your power and destabilize everything. So you want to have that appearance that no, why would you want to do that? I'm ruling in your interests. I'm not really a tyrant. In the second place, he should be seen to collect taxes and require public service only for state purposes, and that he may form a fund in case of a case of war, and generally ought to make himself the guardian and treasurer of them, as if they belong not to him but to the public. He should appear not harsh but dignified, and when men meet him, they should look upon him with reverence and not fear. It is hard for him to be respected if he inspires no respect, and therefore, whatever virtues he may neglect, at least he should maintain the character of a great soldier and produce the impression that he is one. Neither he nor any of his associates should ever be guilty of the least offense against modesty towards the young of either sex who are his subjects, and the women of his family should observe a self control towards uh, other women. The insolence of women has ruined many tyrannies. In the indulgence of pleasure, he should be the opposite of modern tyrants, who not only begin at dawn and pass the whole day in sensuality, but want other men to see them, and they may admire their happy and blessed lot. In these things, a tyrant should, if possible, be moderate, or at any rate, should not parade his vices in the world. For a drunken and drowsy tyrant is soon despised and attacked. Not so he is not so if he is temperate and wide awake. His conduct should be the very reverse of nearly everything which has been said before about tyrants. He ought to adorn and improve his city as though he were not a tyrant, but the guardian of the state. Also, he should appear to be particularly earnest in the service of the gods. For if the men think a ruler is religious and has a reverence for the gods, they are less afraid of suffering injustice at his hands, and they are less disposed to conspire against him because they believe him to have the very gods fighting on his side. If any of this sounds familiar, this is blow by blow, pretty much what Machiavelli eventually says about princes. Okay, yeah, you might not want to follow, you might not personally have these things, you might not be a good Christian, you might not be generous, you might have these desires, but even if you do, you need to act as if you don't. You need to act as if you're religious. You need to watch yourself around other men's wives. That's a big thing Machiavelli talks about, taking their property. You need to look above the board. You need to look as if you care about the people's well-being, even if you don't. So all that cynical advice that Machiavelli is so, celebrated for giving, well, he didn't exactly get it out of nowhere. So you'll see him. He continues to talk thoroughly about all the ways in which tyrant can like adopt these kingly ways to basically avoid looking like a tyrant at the end of the day, right? And he'll go on that for a while. And of course, if you have not read the politics, you should. We're not going to go through the whole thing today just due to time. But I generally wanted to give you that snapshot of what a tyrant looks like to Aristotle, because so much of this just ports one to one to us today, right? Like, it's not sitting in front of the city gates. It's your, the spyware on your cell phone, and kind of the tyranny of the panopticon of social media instead of the city gates. But outside of those technological advancements, all the ideas about what puts a tyrant in power, what keeps him in power, they're all here, right? They're all here. So I just thought it was interesting to go back and take a look at this, because you can really tell that there's nothing new under the sun. And this is why ancient philosophy is just as relevant to us today as it was back then, because these are observations about human nature. And politics might change quite a bit in certain areas because of technology or other advancements, but human nature, it's the same, meaning that we can continue to learn from these examples. All right, guys, let's take a look at the questions of the people we have here real quick. Cherry Coke Nixon says, has been interesting to watch boomers face the consequences of their for crazy violent speech. They're so used to the offline world where words vanish. I think you might mean the online world. Because that's where the words would vanish, right? Or offline world where words vanish. Yeah, I'm a little confused. With what I think you mean the online world there, but yeah, ultimately it has been interesting to watch. A lot of people thought that they were involved, kind of in this, the return of the 1960s. Oh, we're gonna get one more hippie protest in at the end of the day. Turns out, no, actually, you're not just having this like green card to run through and do whatever you want. There is going to be some consequence. Hopefully, that's kind of what we've been pushing for. We've already seen some. Violence is real. You might actually face a criminal charge. You might actually get in trouble. You might lose a job. These are things that just didn't happen to leftists before, and now those are real consequences. So, yeah, it has been interesting to see. Cherry Coke Nixon also says millennials slash Gen Z grew up in a world of self censorship. Yes, this is absolutely true. And again, essential for tyranny to reign. Nixon says feudal lords, red Politburo clicks, and BLM equals the same. Well, not exactly. I mean, the point is here that feudal lords might be somewhat different. But again, if they're tyrannical, then yes, they would be, right? Like the point is tyranny. It's not the system. It's not so much the structure of the system. Do I have a monarchy? Then it's a tyranny. If I have a democracy, I'm free. No. Democracy and tyranny are both bad versions of government. They're both disasters. In fact, they share many of the same disastrous qualities, which is Aristotle's point there. Nixon also says intellectual vegetables versus current events candy. I was just glad that I finally got to do something besides go over current events. Yes, I've been wanting to get back to the theory. We just had so much going on with Minnesota. There was so much important stuff to talk about that we have been over there. But yeah, hopefully these are tasty vegetables. Hopefully these are well seasoned vegetables. But I am glad that we're doing something a little more substantial today. J6 2.0 said, reading the 16th century Niccolo Machiavelli, especially discourses on Livy, chapter 18, how a republic should handle corruption. It's not pretty. No, it's not. No, it's not. But it is very important. And if you haven't read Discourses Livy, if you've only read The Prince, I do encourage you. It's definitely a more challenging book. It's longer. You got to have a little more familiarity with the references of Roman history, but it is ultimately very rewarding. Nixon says politics shows that human nature doesn't change. Yes, absolutely 100%. The whole reason we're doing this. Mart Gates says, love the philosophy episodes. Well, thank you very much, man. Appreciate it. Like I said, I'm glad to finally be back to them. Had enough of current events. Glad to be able to do something I think is a little more evergreen, a little more useful in the long run. He also says, crazy how bad some of the right are at being sapped into viewing mass deportations as an evil thing. It's like George Floyd all over again. Yeah, there really is just there's this impulse. As soon as I see something bad on TV, I saw a bad video on the internet. We've got to run away now. We've got to end everything. Throw the country away. I saw an immigrant cry. That's the meme. But it really is true. And sadly, it's true of a large amount of conservatives, even though it's, that's supposed to be the side that at least understands the severity of the situation. Nixon says, meant boomers are used to pre-2000 free speech. Okay, I see what you're saying there. Gotcha. So a pre-2000s understanding of how the country was supposed to run, a blessed 90s liberal understanding, if you were. All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you all watching. If it's your first time watching on YouTube, you need to click the bell notifications so you know when we go live. I know we're having more people watch on places like Rumble and Odyssey. I'm seeing those numbers go up. So thank you guys for joining there as well. And of course, if you'd like to get these podcasts or these broadcasts as podcasts, then you need to subscribe to Your MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform, Twitter, YouTube, all that stuff. But also make sure you're going on Apple, Spotify, and joining there. When you do leave a rating or review, it helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you guys for watching once again. And as always, I will talk to you next time.